Hi, everybody. It's Diane Yantel. Thanks for joining today's call. We have a large call again today. We have over 1,000 people registered. So I'm going to give it another minute or two before we get started. Thanks for your patience. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining today's call. I'm going to give it another minute or so. We have over 1,000 people registered and over 500 people on already. So I want to give a little bit more time to allow people to join before we get started. So we'll start in another minute or so. Thanks. Okay, hi everybody. This is Diane Yantel. I'm President and CEO of the National Low Income Housing Coalition. Thank you all for joining today. We have another really large call. We have over 650 people on already and nearly 1,000 people registered. So I am so glad to have so many of you join us, especially on what is for many of you, for us, first day back at work. I want to wish you all a happy new year and share what I know is our collective thoughts for 2021 to be much better than 2020, but also to recognize that certainly we have more difficulties and challenges ahead. First we should take a moment to really recognize the historic policy solutions that we achieved together. A congressionally mandated federal eviction moratorium, which I believe is the first time in history in our country that we have had a congressionally mandated federal eviction moratorium, and $25 billion in emergency rental assistance. And I'll talk more about each of those in a moment. And then, of course, we need to get right back to work because the moratorium expires in 27 days, and there will be challenges to getting the $25 billion out to those most in need as quickly as they need it. And much more funding is needed, both for rental assistance and for homeless shelter and service providers. So first, just to recap what we did achieve together. And I hope you all were on the last national call from last year, which was on December 21st, when we did really a deep dive into the emergency rental assistance and extended eviction moratorium that's included in the COVID relief package, and also gave many thanks to the many advocates, organizers, impacted people, and congressional champions that made our collective success possible. So I hope that if you weren't on that call, that you take some time to listen to it. It was recorded. It's available on our website to listen to at any time. But I do want to give a brief overview. I'm not going to go as in depth as we did last time, but I want to give a brief overview and some new updates on the relevant provisions in the COVID relief bill. So first, of course, is the hard fought and won extension of the CDC eviction moratorium. So that extension goes through January 31st of this year, which is 4 weeks from yesterday. So it's clearly not long enough, and a tremendous relief for the tens of millions of people who are at risk of losing their homes this month. So right before that previous extension that was set to expire on December 31st, just a few hours before midnight on December 31st, the CDC posted to its website a new declarative statement that notes the extension through January 31st. And for this and many of the links I'm going to mention, you'll see Elena from our team is going to be putting them in the chat box for you. So the new declarative statement notes the extension through the 31st. They also today, I think just this morning, the CDC updated their FAQs, also only to reflect the extension of the moratorium through January 31st. So nothing else is changed on those documents. I want to also really thank all of you and acknowledge how many of you responded to our urgent call to action when it looked like President Trump was not going to sign the COVID relief bill, and we had a real risk of having the eviction moratorium expire through inaction. And we sent out that call to action. We asked many of you to join us in sending emails directly to the CDC director and the deputy director, urging them to use their own authority to extend the moratorium. And many, many of you responded to that call to action. So thank you. I will say that the CDC has not responded in any way to us, or I believe to any journalists who have reached out to them for comment. They just have not commented on it. So now we have to, of course, we have to continue getting the word out to tenants about the protections under the moratorium so that they know that they are in effect until the end of the month. And as we have been already, we need to continue urging President-elect Biden to issue a new, strengthened, enforced, and extended eviction moratorium on his first day in office. So you all have already seen, and we'll share with you again, the transition memo that NLIHC sent to President-elect Biden immediately after the election, urging that he take this action on his first day in office. We also have a joint fact sheet that we put together with the National Housing Law Project and Eviction Lab on the same, calling for first day of action, federal eviction moratorium. And now, many of you signed on the national letters that we sent to CDC and to Congress, urging for the extension of the eviction moratorium. We had 1,544 organizations join us signing that letter, which we sent to both parties. So we are now adapting that letter, and we're going to reopen it for more signatures. And we are going to address it to and send it to President-elect Biden. So again, it will be a similar letter urging President-elect Biden to extend, strengthen, and enforce an eviction moratorium on his first day in office. And we are reopening that letter today. It'll be available soon. It's not quite available yet. We're putting finishing touches on it. We will put it in the chat box. If you've already signed on to one of the previous letters, you don't need to sign on again. You will have an option to opt out if for any reason you want to, but we'd also love to increase the number of signatories beyond the 1,500 that we have already. We're going to hold that letter open through January 15th, and then we'll send it that following week. So the second major part of the COVID package, of course, is the $25 billion in emergency rental assistance. And we previously shared with you all, and we will again now in the chat box, our general overview of this and the other housing provisions that are in the COVID relief bill. So I hope you'll take a look at that. And I will just share as a reminder and sort of top line reflection on the rental assistance funds. It's $25 billion that will be funded through the Coronavirus Relief Fund and administered by the Department of Treasury. And of the total amount, $400 million goes to US territories, $800 million goes to tribal communities, and the remaining funds are distributed within 30 days to states and cities with populations of 200,000 or more. And I know many of you have a lot of questions about the allocation formula, so I'm going to come back to that in just a moment. But also to say that the fund, 90% of these funds are going to be used to provide financial assistance, back rent or forward rent, back utilities or forward utilities, generally up to 12 months, but in some cases up to 15 months. And the remaining 10% can be used for case management and, as it says in the law, other services to keep households stably housed. So the funds can go directly to landlords, or in cases where landlords refuse to participate in the program, directly to tenants. And for tenants to be eligible, they have to be at or below 80% of area median income, and their states and localities have to prioritize applicants who are at 50% or below area median income. And they have some additional eligibility requirements for tenants, including that they can show in some way that they have experienced a reduction in household income or increased costs related somehow to the pandemic, and that they can demonstrate a risk of experiencing homelessness or housing instability if they were evicted. And there's some more details about it that are on the fact sheet that you can check out. We also, I wanted to call to your attention two other new documents that we created to share with you all. One is related, on that call on December 21st, we had over 1,200 people on the call. We had several hundred questions that you all were asking, really good questions. And so Elena from our team compiled them, and we're beginning to answer them through this FAQ document, which she will post now in the chat box. So take a look at the FAQ. We've answered some of your questions about immigration status and public charge implications and documentation requirements and others. Take a look at that. Know that this FAQ is going to continue to evolve. We'll continue to put out new iterations of it. So send us your questions. Keep sending us your questions. If we can answer them right away, we will. If we can't, we'll find a way. And we'll update the FAQ, so check back often on our website to find the updated Q&A that we put there. The other new document is our estimate of allocations to states for the emergency rental assistance funds. And I believe last time we had the higher level allocations. Dan Threet just put it in the chat box. What we have now included in this document is an explanation of the allocation process and how we came to these estimates. And for that, I'm going to ask Dan Threet from our research team to just briefly share with you all how we expect the allocations to be made and how we came to these estimates in that fact sheet. So Dan, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Diane. So as Diane mentioned in the link I just posted in the chat, we have the higher level estimates of funds that could go to states, and as well as a 2-page explanation of how we produce those estimates. And I'll just run through an explanation of that pretty quickly for you. So the new relief bill text indicates that the funding will be distributed in a fashion very similar to how the Coronavirus Relief Fund was allocated in the spring after passage of the CARES Act, with just a few select changes. So using the information the Treasury Department has shared online about the first round of CRF allocations and what we know about the changes, we produced an estimate of the likely allocation of the $25 billion. Now, importantly, what this estimate shows is not the likely payments that will be made directly to state governments. Rather, it estimates the total maximum allocation to each state and to all the eligible localities within the state which receive a direct allocation of this funding. At this point, I think requires a little bit of explanation. So as Diane mentioned, out of the $25 billion, $800 million is reserved for tribal communities, and $400 million is reserved for US territories. 15 million is set aside this time for Treasury Department's administrative costs. So that leaves 23.785 billion to be distributed among all the states, the District of Columbia, and eligible localities within the states. Now, the allocation of funding for emergency rental assistance proceeds in 2 steps. First, a total maximum allocation for the state and all eligible localities within it is determined. Second, the Treasury Department will ask cities and counties that are eligible for a direct allocation to submit a certification, and their funding will come out of the state's total maximum allocation. So what a state government receives will be equal to the total maximum allocation minus whatever amount is sent to the cities and counties that take a direct allocation. Now, to determine the total maximum allocation to each state, that is to say, how that 23.785 billion is divided up, there are essentially 2 criteria. The bill specifies that 1, the funds should be distributed proportionally on the basis of population, and 2, no state allocation should be less than 200 million. Now, to produce an estimate, we first estimated how the funds would be distributed, assuming each state received a share of the funds equivalent to its share of the total US population, using the vintage 2019 population estimates. For example, because California accounts for 12% of the US population, it would receive 12% of the funds. Now, when you use this simple proportional formula, 18 states do not receive the minimum allocation of 200 million. So to meet the second criterion, we must make adjustments to bring them up. After allocating 200 million to each of these smaller states and the District of Columbia, we then divided up what remained among the rest of the states on a proportional basis. Now, cities and counties with a population of 200,000 or more are eligible to receive a direct allocation from the Treasury Department. And that's a change from the spring when only cities and counties with at least 500,000 were eligible for a direct allocation. If certified, they receive a share of the total state maximum allocation, which is equal to their share of the state population times 45%. The population estimates for here are also drawn from the Census Bureau's vintage 2019 estimates, which were released in March of 2020. And one final wrinkle here, there are cities and counties that overlap and are both eligible. For example, both the city of Los Angeles and Los Angeles County are eligible for a direct allocation on the basis of population. If both receive a direct allocation, the county will receive assistance proportional only for the funding of the population not within the city itself. So, for example, the city of Los Angeles would receive assistance proportional to its 4 million residents, and the county, which has an overall total population of 10 million, would receive aid for the 6 million residents not living within the city limits. I'll pause here and hand things back to Diane.
Great, very helpful, Dan. I appreciate it, thank you. And for those of you who want to read what Dan just shared, it's in that document that Elena dropped, that Dan actually put into the chat box. So page 1, you'll see the table of our estimated allocations for states, and then page 2 and 3, you can read about the process for allocations to cities. And so the next step, and there's been some questions on this in the Q&A, is, as Dan shared, the next step is that cities and communities with population over 200,000 will have to in some way certify with the Department of Treasury. And we are watching and waiting for when Treasury will open that certification process. Certainly we'll let everybody know as soon as we see it. If you see it first, let us know, please. But we'll be keeping an eye out for that. And then we would expect a 2 to 3 week process for the certifications to happen, and then for the funding to be sent directly to the states and the cities who will receive it. So we are probably looking at the second to last, or more likely the last week of January, when these funds are sent out. So we are going to, as I said, we'll be continuing to track Department of Treasury for anything that comes out of there related to the rental assistance, and we'll share it with you all when we have it. We're also going to be tracking very closely how these funds are utilized at the state and local level, as we have been for the duration of the pandemic. We've talked in the past about the 520 or so emergency rental assistance programs that we've been tracking. It's available on our website with a map and some early learnings from that. We'll continue to do that for all of the $25 billion. And so, one, we're hiring. So if any of you are interested in working with us at NLIC to help us track and influence and share learnings from these emergency rental assistance programs, please apply. We'll put that link in the chat box. We're going to look to fill that position as quickly as possible to join our growing team that's been working on this already. We are going to be putting out some materials in the next couple of weeks, at least 2 sets related to sharing some learnings from what's already been done with emergency rental assistance that can be applied to these new dollars that are going to start flowing, all of it with the intention of getting those funds to the lowest income, most marginalized people who are most at risk of eviction first. And you can also look out for some upcoming webinars on those topics too. Another immediate next step that we have ahead of us is influencing the guidance that the Department of Treasury will put out related to this emergency rental assistance fund. And I'd say that there's a lot of unknowns there. And I mean that mostly because of the timing of this. So there is guidance needed for these emergency rental assistance funds in some ways. In some ways, the law is very clear about the uses of the funds. And I expect that some of the communities that have had emergency rental assistance programs up and running for some time will be comfortable with the clarity in the law and will replenish their programs with these new funds. I think in other places where there aren't rental assistance programs, emergency rental assistance programs yet, there might be some reluctance to get those programs up and running without guidance. Certainly we saw that with the first tranche of CRF funds in the CARES Act. So we are hoping the Treasury will put out guidance relatively soon, but of course we are sort of in this in-between stage of administrations. And it's unclear whether this is something Mnuchin will prioritize before he leaves in a few weeks. And if he doesn't, how long it might take for the incoming administration to get their political leadership at Treasury to be able to get guidance out. But we are working under the assumption that they are going to start drafting guidance right away, and we want to influence them on what we think needs to be in that guidance. So we are, through some of our working groups of this larger call, we're going to be getting your feedback and your ideas about what needs to be in that guidance, and then we are going to draft and send out a letter to Treasury next week. So I hope you'll send us your thoughts and ideas and your input, and I hope even more that you will join a couple of the either or both working group calls that we will have this week, where we'll be talking specifically and getting your input on what needs to be in the Treasury guidance. So one of those working group calls is our policy working group. That's tomorrow at 12:30. And our state and local implementation working group calls, which will meet next on Wednesday at 3 o'clock. And again, we'll get your feedback on what we collectively want to see in the Treasury guidance, and we'll share the full letter back with this group next week. And then a reminder, finally, of the third most relevant for this call provision in the bill, which is the extension of the deadline to spend previous CRF dollars. So I saw a couple people ask that question already. Yes, that is in the final bill. It's included in our overview. You'll see it there. But the deadline to spend previous CRF dollars is extended to the end of 2021. And then finally, while it wasn't included in the COVID relief package, we had other really good news right around the same time, which we talked about on the last call. We had somebody from FEMA on that last call, but I just want to remind you all of again, which is a new FEMA policy to reimburse non-congregate sheltering for people experiencing homelessness for the duration of the pandemic, which is a change and a really positive change in their previous policy. So we had somebody from FEMA on our call on December 21st. Again, you can listen to that if you want to in the recorded call. We sent the FEMA guidance out to everyone as a follow-up. We'll put it, Elena's already put it in the chat box now. And given this news and given the resurgence of COVID throughout the country and its increasing impact on people who are homeless, we hope many of you all will utilize this, and we'll be talking about it in our weekly Working with FEMA working group calls. And that next call is on Tuesday at 3 p.m. So just a recap of those working group calls, which everybody is welcome to join, any or all of them. Every Tuesday at 12:30 is the policy working group call. Every Tuesday at 3 o'clock, these are Eastern time, is the Working with FEMA working group. And every Wednesday at 3 o'clock Eastern time is the state and local implementation working group call. And Elena's already put, and maybe can put again in the chat box, how you can register and participate in those calls. And then of course, we'll continue to have these weekly calls to hear from partners throughout the country about what's working, what's not, and to begin advocating for the next COVID relief and or infrastructure package, right? Where many more resources are needed to assure housing stability for people who are homeless and for renters. So we're starting now to put together new estimates of remaining needs and potentially new policy priorities, which again, we'll discuss during the policy working group calls to get your input, and we'll share back with all of you much more on in the coming weeks. So thank you all again so much for all of the work that you put in to get us to this point. And thanks in advance for your continued advocacy and perseverance in the coming months, because we have much more work ahead in the future. So I see there are more questions, but I'm going to pause on answering them for now because I want to turn to some of our other speakers, and I'll work on getting to some of those other answers throughout the call. And I see Sarah and Kim and Elena from the policy team are doing a great job of answering those questions as well. So I'm going to turn now to one of our first guest speakers, which is Sharon McDonald from National Alliance to End Homelessness, who I'm so glad to have join the call today to talk about some new resources that are available through our joint project on the framework for an equitable COVID-19 homelessness response, which you all have heard about throughout the pandemic. And so I'm really glad to have Sharon on to talk about some new resources that are available there. So Sharon, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Diane. So as Diane said, my job here today is to alert you to new resources on family homelessness that's available at the website. And there's a link right there. And looks like Kim is creating a link in the chat box. Before I turn to those resources, I want to congratulate everyone on the successful campaign to secure an eviction moratorium and $25 billion in rental assistance. This is going to go a long way in preventing more families from becoming homeless. So I know many people on the call today already know firsthand the struggles children and families experiencing homelessness face and the desperate need for more resources to support frontline providers and systems to meet those needs. We're hoping that these tools will be useful to you when you educate local and state policymakers and perhaps federal policymakers on how to direct funding where it will be most impactful in helping families. We hope that it will help build the case to not only preserve ESG resources for people already experiencing homelessness, but also in securing new dedicated dollars for families, including from other systems that should just simply be doing more to help families experiencing homelessness, such as the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program that has reserves in many states that could be better deployed. The two tools the tools include 2 papers and a video of 2 wonderful providers who are working on the front line of family homelessness and domestic violence. Elizabeth Eastland of Rainbow Services in LA and Cecily Dove in Crossroads, Rhode Island. Both share their frontline perspective of what families need, what they're seeing, and how they're working to respond. A key message for the framework partners is the importance of centering racial equity in the planning and disseminating of funds. I'm sure you've heard that multiple times. We know that COVID-19 has had a disparate health and economic impact on people of color in the US. It's also poised to accelerate or is already exacerbating existing structural inequities in who gets evicted, in who experiences hunger, and in who experiences homelessness. Black women and children are already vastly overrepresented among those who experience homelessness, and we have an obligation to ensure the resources we get work to counteract those existing disparities, not further magnify them. So family providers like Cecily and Elizabeth are doing tremendous work to help families and children, but they desperately need more resources and supports. And they need those resources to be targeted where they'll be the most impactful and directed to people who are most vulnerable. So during this pandemic, some children and families are living without any shelter. They're residing in cars, tents, places not intended for human habitation. These families are in urgent need of immediate connection to the tools they need to stay safe, and they need supports to quickly connect to a safe place to stay, ideally a place of their own. Family shelter programs are being asked to do far more than ever before while keeping families safe from COVID. Children that used to be in school all day are now in shelter programs and expected to attend school remotely from buildings where there may be very limited infrastructure, including poor Wi-Fi connections, absence of laptops, adult support, or even space to allow them to meet their educational benchmarks. Parents that lost childcare also lost jobs. So people who may have been on a trajectory to exit shelter quickly with income from work experience severe financial setbacks with lost wages. And this has led to longer shelter stays. So this is increasing the stress on children and families in shelters who really require a safe, stable housing platform to thrive. Family shelter programs need more support to provide the services that families and children require, including supports for children to thrive developmentally and academically. So while homeless service programs have been gearing up to respond to the needs of children and families, there's extraordinary external pressures, as you all know. There may be increases in the number of families seeking shelter, just as these programs have been forced to reduce capacity to meet CDC guidelines. And as the time it takes for families to exit shelter has been increasing. So when there's no safe shelter accommodations for families that lack other options, families are forced to remain in unsafe situations, including unsheltered homelessness and untenable, doubled up situations, or continue to remain with an abusive partner that they desperately want to leave. So new infusions of resources are needed to be targeted to help families exit homelessness and secure their own housing. This is important for children and families' well-being, but it's also important so that the strain on shelter programs can be alleviated so that shelters can do what they're critically needed to do, offer safe and immediate accommodations for people who lack other options. So helping families escape homelessness requires an infusion of resources to help families secure housing. They require rental assistance, as well as support to identify new units, negotiate with landlords. They will require support to establish their new household and develop or maintain connections to other services. Finally, we need tools to avert people from entering or becoming homeless whenever that is safe as possible. Often resources intended to prevent evictions don't reach the families most likely to become homeless. The majority of families who enter shelter do so after leaving a doubled up situation. In some situations, those arrangements could be preserved with additional supports or resources, or perhaps prolonged until families can be assisted into new housing. But often homelessness prevention programs aren't made available to secondary tenants. So I hope that's something we discuss as we think about the $25 billion. Providers are also reporting extraordinary progress in diversion and problem solving, helping individuals and families who have already lost their housing find alternative places to stay to avoid entering shelter. This is designed to expand opportunities for families, not to curtail them. With greater investments in staff and flexible financial assistance, homeless service agencies could divert many more families from entering shelter, protecting families from experiencing a shelter stay when it's safe, and also preserving resources for families who lack any other safe options. So we can do much better in supporting the work of providers like Cecily and Elizabeth, who know what to do to help families experiencing homelessness, including those fleeing domestic violence. And so we're hoping that these tools will be useful for you as you consider how to expand investments and build the case from your local and state partners in getting more resources. I'm sure that there's aspects to this work that aren't incorporated into this document. And if we've missed something, I hope that you will let us know. If there's anything else that we should be doing to help you advance your work to expand options and safety for homeless families, please also let us know. And with that, I turn it back to my hosts.
Great, Sharon. Thanks so much. Thanks for your work on this, and thanks for sharing it on today's call. There were a few echoes of thanks in the Q&A box. And one question for you, somewhat related, although not directly, but what recommendations you and the Alliance are making to the incoming Biden administration to address family homelessness?
Oh, for God's sakes, there's so much to do. I think if I can, highlight a pet peeve of mine. Each year, states receive $16 billion. Imagine that, $16 billion to support families, low-income families. And I think that a good, healthy segment of those resources should be better supporting families so that they never experience housing instability, never mind homelessness. We need better supports for families, a better platform, higher income placements. We need an economic floor under families, so that when they lose a job, they don't spiral immediately into losing their housing. It's just, we can do so much more to support families. So I think, as always, a priority is going to be making the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Account as healthy as it can be. So those families who have already fallen through every other crack that's available in the social safety net have safety and never have to experience a closed shelter door. That would be a personal goal, that there's always room in the inn. But really, we need more from the HHS partners and other system resources to ensure that families just are not as vulnerable to becoming homeless in the first place.
Absolutely. That's great. Thank you, Sharon. Thanks so much for joining today. Really appreciate it, and really appreciate the partnership that we have with the Alliance on all of this work.
We're very, very grateful for you and all your leadership.
Thanks, Sharon. All right, we're going to turn now to field updates, and we're going to start with Sue Watlaw-Phillips from the Metropolitan Interfaith Council on Affordable Housing in Minnesota. Sue, please go ahead.
Thanks, Diane, and thank you all for all the great work that you do at the National Low-Income Housing Coalition and all the great advocates that are on this call and helping to make this COVID-19 relief bill move forward, as well as the work that we've done on the budget for HUD and other agencies too. Again, I'm Sue Watlaw-Phillips. I'm also president of the National Coalition for the Homeless. MICA is located in the metropolitan area of the Twin Cities of Minneapolis, St. Paul, and suburban areas. And our board is made up of 70% of diverse groups. Half of our board are people who have experienced homelessness. And so we work with congregations and organizations and people experiencing homelessness to be welcoming communities across the metro area, to love and treat other people as we want to be treated, and to do as we talk about from our verse in Micah 6:8, is to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with our God. So as I'm talking about the response that we've been doing in Minnesota around the COVID-19 on housing and homelessness, I'm going to primarily focus on the rental assistance. But I want to talk just briefly a little bit about our homeless assistance too, and thank again for the great work that Sharon just also said from the National Alliance and the work that they've done over the years too. In Minnesota, in mid-February, we began pushing very hard the Housing Finance Agency, the Department of Health, Department of Human Services, and the Minnesota Interagency Council on Homelessness to really start looking at this pandemic that was beginning to happen worldwide. Some of us, I've been in the field for 53 years, have been through some other smaller pandemics and TB outbreaks, and so we could see that it was likely that this was going to be a significant issue in Minnesota as well as across the country. And so what we were able to do is get the state to start doing weekly provider calls with the Interagency and Department of Health and Department of Human Services and Housing Finance Agency. And this included people experiencing homelessness, providers and advocates working together on our response around the COVID-19 pandemic and how it was impacting people that were experiencing homelessness, at risk of experiencing homelessness, or potentially could be losing their housing due to foreclosure or to loss of their rental unit. We also had great advocates from Minnesota Housing Partnership, a longtime member of the National Income Housing Coalition, as well as a great partner in Minnesota, Freedom from the Streets, Homes for All, Homeline, APAC, and MICA, of course, and multiple other groups that worked on that. So in March, we were able to encourage the state to put $330 million of emergency funding into addressing the COVID response out of our state dollars. And from that, $26.5 million was for shelter and outreach and helping people get into motels out of our congregate shelters. And then $5.5 million went into housing supports, and another $11 million went to our tribal nations to assist. But it was clear that even with these resources, that was not going to be enough. So over the last 10 months in combining the state resources, we've also added some of the CARES funding into homeless resources. So we've spent almost $50 million on outreach, shelter, rapid rehousing, and moving folks into motels and back into housing as a part of our work in regards to homelessness. In regards to the rental assistance and the mortgage assistance that we worked on, it was clear that we had at least 250,000 families at risk of homelessness in Minnesota because of their low wages or because they were on fixed incomes. And so we began working with our state legislature to try to get $100 million of the CARES funding for rental assistance and mortgage assistance. While that did not pass in our regular legislative session, we were able to have the Minnesota Management and Budget allocate $100 million to our state housing finance agency for those items. So I'm going to ask if Kim will put up onto the screen, and you can see a little bit of the information on that. So in putting together this $100 million program, the agency worked with all of us in the field in trying to make it as flexible as possible to help as many folks in staying in their own housing. We already had, since 1993, a family homeless prevention and assistance program that served singles, families, and youth. And so we've had some long-term experience in doing family homeless prevention for folks. And we also wanted to make sure that we have the dollars available for tribes, recognized tribes in Minnesota, as well as local units of government and nonprofits. And that we really wanted to have a diversity of folks that were eligible as far as different organizations, including Latino, Somali, CAP agencies, mediation services. So really trying to make this a rental assistance program that could meet the needs of all the folks that were at risk of becoming homeless due to the COVID-19 pandemic. You can see if you stay on page 4, Kim, if you can go back to page 4. Yeah, thanks. And just, you can see on the income eligibility, while we would go up to 300% of poverty threshold, we're in final analysis of the program right now. The majority of the people served were at 200% of poverty. And the program basically went back to March 1st. That occurred after March 1st, as far as any past due rent. And basically had to be eligible for a public health emergency due to unemployment, illness, or other COVID-19 related. If you want to go to the next page, Kim, then you can see the eligible expenses, which included rent payments, mortgage payments, contract for deed, manufactured home park lot rents, manufactured home payments, utility payments, association fees, home ownership, homeowner insurance, additional housing related costs, and then also housing property tax payments were eligible in cases of foreclosure or prevention. So we had this very excellent program that we started in the summer of 2020. The dollars were out and available by August. And so over 5 months have spent $100 million in helping to keep families and individuals and couples in their own housing. Now, the way that the program was initially set up was to make sure that we were really addressing equity and making sure that we were focusing on people that were at greatest risk of becoming homeless due to eviction or foreclosure or related displacement. If you want to go to the last page on that handout, and then specific groups that are overrepresented, including Native Americans, people of color, Black persons, people with disabilities, veterans, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or questioning queer persons. So really trying to address the diversity of folks that live within Minnesota. While the program initially was designed only for tenants to apply, we did have counties in Minnesota that use some of their own CARES funding to actually have landlords apply on behalf of the tenants. And so we had Dakota County and Hennepin County and Ramsey County are some of our largest counties in our metro area that were a part of that. And so in Dakota County, the property owner program paid $1.5 million to property owners, which had over 500 units. And they spent over $3.2 million of the state dollars, as well as over $700,000 of their CARES dollars in helping tenants stay basically in their program. I just want to read, because I know this landlord piece and paying directly money to landlords and having them apply, I know that some people are a little bit hesitant on that. I just want to read some of the, one of the thank you notes that Dakota County received. It said, "Thank you very much for the opportunity to provide some feedback on the landlord program. Cannot tell you how much this program has meant to our property in Burnsville. We had about 25 to 30% of our residents who have been unable to pay their rent for many months. Although we have distributed information to all the residents about applying for rent assistance several times, some people are either too embarrassed or simply don't want to ask for rental assistance on their own. Allowing us to provide the information directly to the county is the only way that these residents were going to have their rent paid. I can tell you with 100% certainty that this program was responsible for keeping a lot of families in their homes. They would have a huge balance due once the moratorium on evictions was lifted, and these are good people. They don't deserve to lose their homes over something that they cannot control. I cannot thank you enough." So I think there's a number of lessons that we have learned, and we will have more learnings on this that we will be providing to you as we are moving forward. I think that Housing Finance Agency very quickly set up this program and made it very easily accessible by a one call-in number, 211, also a website, and then also being able to text to actually get this application. I think what we failed to recognize is that we really needed a lot more input from people that were experiencing homelessness, that had lost their rental unit, and or folks that were at risk of losing their rental unit to help us in designing it better. I think that we had a great diversity of providers. I think the web-based program was very good for folks that had the computer skills and had internet available to them. But I think that we had a lot of folks that had struggles with that and not being able to complete the application on their own. We also had the program available in Spanish, Somali, and Hmong, major languages that are spoken in our community. And I think one of the things that we learned as we were moving through is that by having community mediation involved in helping folks that were struggling and getting through the application process, that we were really able to do some hand holding in making that happen. So I think by having landlords eligible to apply with their tenants, on behalf of their tenants, is that we deal with, like I said in the comment from one of the landlords, is we deal with those folks that are too embarrassed or too afraid, folks that have different types of learning disabilities, traumatic brain injury or other issues, folks that are not computer literate, and folks that just, you know, are afraid of just applying for public types of resources. So I think the more that we can have people that have experienced homelessness as decision makers and people that are at risk of experiencing homelessness as decision makers at all of our tables, as we do at MICA and at the National Coalition for the Homeless, I think we can really design both the homeless response as well as the rental and mortgage assistance response that can really meet the needs of people within our community. Thank you.
Sue, thank you so much. That's really a terrific report. Great work, very helpful learnings and advice that I think a lot of people can now apply to the new funds that they're going to be receiving. So I really appreciate your work and I appreciate you sharing it on the call. Would love to have you back in the future to share any additional insights and updates. Thanks for joining.
And Diane, if I could just say that we are asking the Commissioner of Housing Finance Agency if we can make available to the National Low-Income Housing Coalition the Minnesota Housing COVID-19 Housing Assistance Program Guide, which is a 27-page guide that may be helpful for communities that have not set one up previously, or maybe some guidance that folks may want to use if you have one now. So hopefully we'll be able to provide that to you.
Great, thanks. Yeah, we'd love to see it and to share it out. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to turn now to our next field update, which comes from Marty North. She is the president of Arkansas Coalition of Housing and Neighborhood Growth for Empowerment, A-Change. Marty, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so very much for this opportunity to participate in the call today. And I'd like to thank the National Low-Income Housing Coalition for all that you're doing to help us strengthen our communities across the country. As was stated, I'm Marty North, and I have the distinct honor of serving as the board president for the Arkansas Coalition of Housing and Neighborhood Growth for Empowerment, a statewide affordable housing nonprofit coalition of organizations and supporters who are committed to improving the affordable housing landscape across the state of Arkansas. And we've been making a change in Arkansas since 2005. The pandemic has presented us with a lot of challenges, but some wonderful opportunities as well. A-Change decided mid-year last year as a result of the pandemic to focus on really heavily of our two public policy priorities for 2020 and 2021, which include creating comprehensive housing surveys, and the second is partnering and supporting other organizations that are working on the ground to address Arkansas's habitability and landlord-tenant laws here in the state of Arkansas. Arkansas, unfortunately, continues to have the worst ranking in the nation as it relates to habitability standards, of which we have none, and landlord-tenant rights, in which we have the most egregious ones in the country. So in looking at the comprehensive housing surveys, we have launched committees working on getting with our affordable housing providers across the state to engage with them on some of the persistent needs and newly developed needs that are emerging, so we can educate our member base along with our variety of our various communities. But we also want to use this information to share with local, state, and federally elected officials. The second component of it is to generate a survey that would be provided to those individuals who are running for election or re-election to get their position as it relates to a variety of affordable housing topics that emerge from the housing surveys. The results from those individuals would be made public, and it would help A-Change identify in advance who our potential affordable housing champions could be, but to also inform communities regarding the position that various individuals running for office have as it pertains to housing. The state of Arkansas and our General Assembly, we do not have a commission, committee, or anything that is singularly focused on the topic of housing. And so we're hoping to change that. The second aspect of our public policy priority is partnering with other organizations that are laser focused and mobilizing around habitability and landlord-tenant rights. So earlier in 2020, a new 501c4 organization was begun, Arkansans for Stronger Communities, and A Change is one of the partner organizations of this particular effort, and have some very interesting and enlightening information from them. They are collecting as much data as possible as it relates to evictions in the state, and are working on a variety of bills to go forward in our upcoming session here at the state, which begins next week. So in October, the state of Arkansas, our legislator approved $10 million of CARES Act funding to support rental assistance. Unfortunately, significant numbers of landlords are refusing to take rental assistance and are suing to evict their tenants anyway. Unfortunately, we're on track to match the level of filed evictions that existed in November of 2019 prior to the pandemic. With some regularity, the eviction filings as of November were as a result of landlords refusing rental assistance, landlords refusing to accept CDC declarations from tenants, and tenants who were undergoing multiple quarantine periods, which were impacting their ability to earn wages in which to even attempt to pay their rent. Because Arkansas does not have a standard electronic format in which to collect a variety of data points, the information pertaining to eviction filings is hindered, and we do anticipate the numbers to be higher than what have been identified. But of what was able to be identified, 461 filings were performed in the month of November alone. And these filings were for non-payment of rent and are tracked on Court Connect, of which 413 of these were unlawful detainer cases, and 24 were failure to vacate criminal cases. So Arkansas is one of the few states, if not the only states, in which not paying rent can be considered a criminal offense. And we're hoping to finally get that changed in the near future. As I said earlier, in October, the state legislature approved $10 million of the CARES Act funding for rental assistance, and a new website, arfreshstart.com, was created as a resource for tenants to go to help identify resources to help them pay their rent. The $10 million was allocated to 14 community action agencies across the state that serve all 75 Arkansas counties. So by the beginning of December, 12 of the 14 agencies had received over 11,000 applications for assistance, with over 900 applications being paid, and the remaining 10,000 in some form within the pipeline for case management and consideration. And within that short of period of time, 10 of the organizations had expended all of its capacity and funding. And as of the beginning of December, only 4 community action agencies were still accepting applications. So there is a tremendous need for additional funding here, and a tremendous level of need to work on our eviction statutes here, landlord-tenant rights, and minimum habitability standards here in the state of Arkansas. So I echo many of the sentiments that were expressed by the 2 preceding speakers, and thank you once again for all of the work that you're doing to help strengthen our communities. And we look forward to providing additional updates to the National Low Income Housing Coalition as we make progress on these public policy priorities. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Marty. We'd love to have you back in the future to share updates. And thank you for all of your really good and difficult work. Can I ask the number of landlords who are refusing to accept rental assistance? Is it because there are additional requirements of them in order to receive the funds, or is it just because they would prefer to evict and get a new tenant in?
I think it's a combination. So you have individuals who don't really understand the moratorium and they feel like it is a slippery slope of government intervention into their space. So you've got an aspect of that. You've got another aspect of just individuals who are like, we can get another tenant. Because once again, we have really horrific laws here that allow quick evictions. People do self-evictions, which are not allowed, but I mean, they are happening at a record level as well. So a person could come home after 3 days and find all their stuff on the curb, which should not be happening, but we get reports of that as well. So it's a combination of factors.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you for raising that and pushing back against it. I think it points to the importance of the new emergency rental assistance funds, both like finding a balance there, I think, where it both allows for landlords to apply for the funds directly if they're doing it together with the tenant, or if the landlord refuses to participate, for the tenant to receive those funds directly that they can use to pay the rent. That's a real challenge. Thank you, Marty, so much for your work, and thank you for joining today's call to share it.
Thank you.
I'll turn now to our next field update from Shelley Nortz, who's Deputy Executive Director for Policy at the Coalition for the Homeless in New York. Shelley, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Happy New Year, everybody. And thank you, Diane, for all of your amazing work through the holidays. It was, you're a true force to be reckoned with. And we were so pleased that you were so successful. I'm going to try to keep this quick. We have a number of updates since our last time talking to this group, starting with the best news that we got at the state level over the holidays, which is the eviction moratorium and related matters were extended through May 1st by legislation passed last week by the legislature and signed into law by Governor Cuomo. This includes a moratorium on residential evictions until May 1st, 2021 for tenants who have endured COVID-related hardship, residential foreclosure protections until May 1st, 2021, suspension of tax lien sales, and then some related matters having to do with credit discrimination and negative credit reporting associated with taking advantage of these provisions. And the state's reliance on the eviction moratorium has paid dividends. The census in our family shelters during the pandemic has actually fallen. Regrettably, the census in our single adult shelters in New York City continues to reach new records pretty much on a weekly basis. And that is because that's a population of people who have literally been washed out of much more informal housing arrangements. And so eviction moratoria aren't very helpful to them. People who lost their jobs immediately lost their rent by the week rooms. Very often restaurant workers, day laborers, that kind of folk. So we're grateful for that window of time. Rental assistance has not been such a positive thing in New York. The majority of the $100 million that were initially set aside for rental assistance did not get spent by the deadline. The deadline has now been extended to February 1st, and some structural problems were fixed in how the state was administering the program to make more people eligible, which in the presence of an eviction moratorium is necessary. For example, there was a requirement that people be rent burdened prior to the pandemic. But many of the people that need the assistance weren't rent burdened until the pandemic. We are grateful for the $25 billion coming from Washington. We were strong supporters of the $100 billion because we know we're going to need much more than that. Our estimate of the number of households in greatest need is something on the order of 990,000 households that are going to need rental assistance, at least short-term, if not long-term. And it is both, as many of us know. The other concern I would have about the federal money is that the formulas really, we're a little worried about the funds going to the state and not enough going to the big cities, but also how the state administers assistance is a concern. The poorest people in New York receive assistance from public assistance from welfare departments, and there is not presently in the structure through Treasury, et cetera, a real nexus to the public assistance system that serves the neediest New Yorkers. Turning to vaccines, we learned today that the city is looking for some flexibility, I guess, in both federal and state rules to allow homeless people sleeping in shelters to be in the 1B category, which is the next group getting vaccines in New York. We think that's critical. Right now, we still have in New York City alone 5,000 people sleeping in congregate shelters, and it's critically important that they be protected as soon as possible. We know that the mortality rate for homeless people sleeping in shelters in New York is 75% higher than the general population in New York City. And it's 79% higher among single adults. It's also quite a bit higher among what we refer to as adult families who don't have minor children in the family. And that's because of a combination of they're staying in settings where they may have shared dining, even if they have a private room, or shared bathrooms, even if they have a private room, and also higher rates of disability and healthcare vulnerability. We're working in addition to making sure that people get vaccines on the long hauler issue. Obviously, for many people, COVID-19 is something that is causing chronic illness and chronic disability. And that's certainly going to be important for our clients and all homeless people. So there's a COVID working group in New York that is working on the kind of long-term implications of this that we're part of, as well as an equity agenda. As someone mentioned earlier, obviously, Black and Latino people are suffering literally much higher rates of death than others as a result of the pandemic. In the interest of saving lives, we continue to litigate these issues. We are currently in litigation on two critical issues. One is suing the city of New York for an order to move the rest of the people out of shelters and double or triple hotel rooms into single hotel rooms to protect their lives, because we've been following the aerosol science very heavily. We've got arguments. Legal Aid Society is representing us in that case, and they've got oral arguments this week on that state case. And this is critical. 85% of the homeless population sleeping in shelters in New York State or in New York City. So this is a vitally important thing. The other litigation we're bringing is on the need to provide proper internet access for homeless students sleeping in New York City shelters. Many of the kids are having trouble because there isn't adequate Wi-Fi, and the connectivity on the equipment that they may have been issued by the schools is not providing them access to educational services. And we are so many months into this pandemic. Oral arguments happened in that case recently, and we are moving the court denied the motion to dismiss from the city and is moving to an evidentiary hearing on the facts at this point. So we're hopeful for an outcome on that soon. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Shelley. Such good and important work. I really appreciate everything that you're doing, and congratulations on the extended eviction moratorium in New York State. I think that you all have now achieved the strongest and the lengthiest eviction moratorium. So it's great work. And I wonder if you could speak briefly to how you all were able to so improve the previous state eviction moratorium to strengthen it in such a way and to be able to have it extended for such a long period of time.
So as we all have learned recently, politics makes a difference. And in this case, we have a very strong state legislature that really insisted upon this. And I will say the governor has, he signed the bill, he recognized it, but I think the legislature really kind of took the lead and said, all right, enough already. They came out of the last election cycle with supermajorities in both houses. So this is the beginning of what we hope will be an entire legislative session of more progressive policy coming out of Albany.
Yeah, it's great. It's really a model now for the rest of the country. And similarly, I'm wondering about the $100 million. New York is one of the states that has had more trouble spending the rental assistance funds. And you talked about some of the ways that the program's been improved now. Like, how confident do you feel that the improvements are enough or can be enough to make sure that this new infusion of funds get to the renters who need it the most?
Well, I mean, the good news about the new infusion of funds is that it's coming through a different process. So not all of it's going to the state, for starters. So to the extent that a large chunk of it goes to the city of New York, the city of New York has a closer nexus to the people who are at risk of eviction and has a service delivery apparatus that is going to be more efficient in getting help to people. I think part of the problem is that the original program was set up at our state housing agency, which is really a housing finance agency and a rent regulatory agency, not a human service delivery, rental assistance delivery apparatus. They do administer the state portion of Section 8, but they do it through the housing authority construct. And not every community has a housing authority. Every community does have a social service district. And so one of the things that we're going to be looking to for any administration of the new money is to make sure that both the state and localities work closely with the social service districts to make sure that people who receive public assistance actually have access to the program. I will say, I think the new rental assistance program before the new federal funds, I think someone was going to put a link to that in the chat, and also to our mortality rate chart. And I will put something in about the new eviction moratorium so that people can read about it.
Okay, great. Thank you. And we'll be sure to share that out with our network too. Shelley, thanks so much for your good work and your partnership. And thanks for joining the call today.
Thank you. Okay,
and now I'm going to turn to our next field update, which comes from Jennifer Hark-Dietz from PATH. I don't know if we have a slide. Oh, good. We do have a slide for her. Jennifer, thanks for joining. I'll turn it over to you.
Yes, thank you so much for inviting me to share today and for bringing together the amazing work happening throughout the country to support our unhoused neighbors. As Diane mentioned, my name is Jennifer Hark-Dietz, and I have the honor of being the Deputy CEO for PATH. PATH is based in California, and we provide supportive services, really everything from street to home, as well as build supportive and affordable housing for individuals and families experiencing homelessness. So we have a distinct perspective on how COVID has impacted our most vulnerable. Operating out of 42 sites and serving over 25,000 individuals throughout the state with close to 1,000 team members, COVID has literally changed every aspect of our work. So there's so much happening in California. Today, I'm actually going to share 2 on-the-ground examples of COVID response within 2 cities in California, so San Diego and Los Angeles. I'm going to start with San Diego, and one of the key programs that the city started to bring the most vulnerable into a safe place at the beginning of the pandemic. It's a bit unique in that it's a large congregate setting, and as we've heard today, there's some fear around congregate settings and whether or not people can safely socially isolate. They developed this site because of the anticipated staffing challenges at the city's various shelters. So at the beginning, no one really knew what the impact would be to the workforce. So the program allows for centralized staff in one place, which is the San Diego Convention Center, to ensure personnel could be efficient even with limited resources. The site has been used to house thousands of individuals experiencing homelessness since opening in April, averaging around 900 people a night, and has allowed many city shelter sites to decompress or lower their numbers to help reduce the spread. These were sites that didn't have the 6 feet of distance or any barriers. The program was approved by the previous mayor, Mayor Faulkner, and the new mayor, Mayor Gloria, is looking to extend the program through March of 2021. As I mentioned, the convention center is a congregate setting. However, surprisingly, only recently had its first large outbreak with the increase in COVID-19 cases we're seeing throughout California. One of the good things about the convention center is that the individuals living there are currently being prioritized for what's called Project Home Key. Project Home Key in California is a statewide initiative that we believe has a lot of opportunity for expansion. It allows municipalities to purchase hotels and motels that could operate either as immediate interim housing or be converted to permanent supportive housing, also immediately or within the next few years. We're operating a few throughout the state and one in San Diego with over 190 rooms. And the great part of Project Home Key is we can cut through a lot of the red tape and get individuals into these rooms within 90 days. I will say, while we were initially concerned about the convention center due to the fear about close contact, we do feel like the operation has gone smoothly and agree on the need for the extension. There have been many COVID relief programs statewide that have closed when the numbers were plateauing, and we now know that we had not seen the second wave. As I moved to Los Angeles, where outbreaks among individuals experiencing homelessness have drastically increased since December 1st, I'll start with a lawsuit that was filed by the LA Alliance for Human Rights back in the spring of 2020 against the city and county of Los Angeles. Their goal was really to compel the local leaders to act urgently. We've seen in Los Angeles in particular, it having a lot of challenges really getting programs off the ground. Almost immediately, federal Judge Carter became involved and narrowed the lawsuit to a very specific population, those living within 500 feet of a freeway under overpass in the city of Los Angeles. This population was selected due to the increased risk of health complications and dying on the street. LA has seen hundreds of individuals experiencing homelessness who are unhoused die on the street in recent years. One of the biggest challenges with the lawsuit from a provider perspective was really coming at the beginning of COVID, when everyone was trying to figure out how to keep people safe, and the CDC guidelines were literally changing daily as new information was uncovered about the virus. The result of the lawsuit was a settlement where LA City is required to provide 6,700 beds specifically for this population, and LA County will provide the supportive service funding. As advocates, we really wanted to ensure that those who were COVID vulnerable were also included, because there really aren't reasonable alternatives in the LA area right now. So we're grateful that these individuals will also be prioritized. One of the challenges is the way that this new program has been unfolded isn't exactly in line with CDC recommendations, which does not recommend clearing encampments during the pandemic. So we know that the lack of cleanups can be exceptionally frustrating for community members. PATH currently operates over 1,000 interim housing beds at 11 different sites in Los Angeles. And what we try to do is work closely with the neighbors so they understand how critical it is to follow the CDC guidelines and how moving people along, it can literally mean saving a life. It can mean life or death for our unhoused neighbors. So what we have seen in LA, similar to Project Home Key statewide, is a swifter response with this lawsuit. We believe one of the positive outcomes from COVID-19 is the ability to ramp up new programs quicker than ever before. In one instance in LA, we opened a new interim housing site with over 200 beds just 6 days after touring the hotel. The push that our elected officials are feeling in LA between the rising COVID numbers, the number of encampments, and the need to add these beds quickly from the settlement is enormous. Everyone's working around the clock to try and manage the spread. Our hope for 2021 is to be able to get back to our mission of ending homelessness, not just managing it. This is a truly difficult time, and I appreciate the opportunity to share 2 very different responses to an unprecedented challenge. I'll turn it back to you, Diane, and thank you so much for all of the work you do to make our community stronger. Thanks again.
Thank you, Jennifer. I really appreciate your work and your leadership, and I appreciate you joining the call to share these lessons learned. There's a question for you about recent reports about increased COVID-19 among people experiencing homelessness and potentially an outbreak at the convention center. And if you can speak to the severity of the crisis right now in LA and the response to it.
Sure, yeah, if you follow anything like the LA Times, you'll see that it really, in the congregate settings, it really is starting to spread much faster than it was before December. So what we're doing now with our work with the Department of Public Health and the Department of Health Services in Los Angeles is really trying to mitigate the spread. The isolation and quarantine sites are full. We operate the largest site in Pomona, and it really is a scary situation. So we're excited that the vaccine has come, as some other folks talked today, and many of our staff have been prioritized due to their essential work function. But right now it's really about managing and trying to make sure that the folks we serve and all of our staff are compliant with the guidelines. So it's really a constant battle.
Yeah. And it's I think again, points to the need for additional resources for homeless shelter and service providers in the next COVID relief package, because those CARES Act funds are almost gone and the need is only growing. So thank you, Jennifer. Again, I really appreciate your work and appreciate you joining. So, okay, so that's our last speaker for today. I wanted to just recap and remind folks about what's next. First, we have the sign-on letter. I believe it is ready now. And so somebody from the team can put that in the chat box if I'm right. If not, or in either case, we'll send it as follow-up information. But again, reminder that we will be circulating within the hour an adapted sign-on letter to President-elect Biden, urging him on his first day in office to implement an expanded, a strengthened, an improved, and an enforced eviction moratorium. Elena just put the link in the chat box. So we're holding that letter open until January 15th. If you've already signed on to the previous letters, you don't need to sign on again. There's an option for you to opt out if you want to for any reason, but I really hope that any of you who haven't signed yet will, and also everybody will help us circulate to your networks to get additional signatories on that letter before we close it and send it on the 15th. Also want to remind and invite and welcome all of you to join any of our weekly working group calls. We have a lot of work to do in the days and weeks ahead. We're going to be seeking your feedback and input on our letter to Treasury, urging them to put out guidance that ensures that the emergency rental assistance funds get to the renters who need it the most as quickly as possible. We're going to be putting together our policy asks for the next COVID relief package. We're going to be continuing to share information and learn about what's working and what's not with FEMA reimbursement for non-congregate shelter for people experiencing homelessness. So please join our working groups. So we have, just a reminder, on every Tuesday at 12:30 Eastern time is the policy working group. Every Tuesday at 3 p.m. Eastern time is the Working with FEMA working group. And every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern is the State and Local Implementation Working Group call. Also, we have a monthly call, Tenant Talk Live, which is focused on and predominantly led by low-income renters. So our next Tenant Talk Live call is today at 6 p.m. and that's facilitated by Kyle and Renee at the National Income Housing Coalition. So you're free to and welcomed to join that call as well. We will send out information as we have it from the Department of Treasury in terms of any new news about certifying for those state and local funds from the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. Anything else that comes out of Treasury, we'll send it out as soon as we have it. So keep an eye out for email updates. And of course, please join us next week, Monday at 2:30. We'll have our regular national call with further updates and updates from the field. So thank you all very much for joining, and we'll talk to you all soon. Thanks, bye.